question I get asked a lot is if your child is in the process of being diagnosed for autism or already has an autism diagnosis, what difference is it really going to make? What help can you practically ask for from your child's school? And does it really make a difference? Well, in today's episode of the Real Talk with Rhi podcast, that is exactly what we're diving into. All of the formal and the informal things that you'll be able to ask for your child's school to help with, for extra support. And a lot of these things, I'm going to hazard a guess that you haven't thought of and didn't know existed. So before we dive into it, I just want to say hello. Welcome. My name is Rhiannon Morgan. Everyone calls me Rhi. If you're new around here, hello. If you're a returning viewer / listener, so good to have you back. Thank you so much for joining me for this chat today. So your child has been diagnosed with autism, or maybe they're on the pathway and there's a general consensus that your child has needs that, need additional support. Well, what can that support look like and how do you go about asking for it? Well, initially, the very first thing that you can do with your child's school is just increase the level of connection, communication that is happening between you and the people that are caring for your child during the day. And this can help so much for so many different reasons. Now, traditionally, if you have got a neurotypical child, you may see your child's teacher briefly in the morning, potentially not if they go into something like breakfast club. So perhaps they get given to, the children are looked after by someone in the breakfast club area rather than your child's actual teacher. And then maybe you see them when they're dismissing them at the end of the day, but maybe not. Maybe it's a TA dismissing them. And then maybe you just have a proper chat with them at officially structured parents' evenings. Now, you don't need to wait for parents' evenings in order to bring things up with your child's teacher or to increase this communication. And I would encourage you to, and this is just whether your child has autism or not, if you have any concerns, do not save them for parents' evening. Bring them up with your child's teacher as soon as possible. Now, obviously, you'll probably see them at the point where they are dismissing your child. And I'm sure teachers out there listening will agree this is probably not the time for a really in-depth chat, because ultimately the teacher is trying to hand over probably 30 kids, trying to find the right parents, make sure they give the right child to the right people. It's quite a busy time. But it doesn't mean you can't just touch base at a very basic level, like, how's the day been? Like, not like a positive day, or do we need a chat? And then perhaps you could hang back till after they've dismissed the children if there's anything that really needs discussing. Now, I know teachers will generally, it varies from teacher to teacher, will come out and do the can I have a word at the end of the day if there's been anything really significant, but not all teachers will do that. And a lot of the issues that children with autism will face will be in the greater scheme of things that teachers need to go and, can I have a word about? Reasonably small things. So if your child injures another child or does something really quite traumatic, then your child's teacher is going to come out and say, can I have a word? If, however, they've been a little dysregulated because of small things going on in the day, your child's teacher won't necessarily naturally volunteer that information just because they are busy. So opening up this channel of communication, and this is going to look different depending on your school, your who picks up your child. It's just going to look different on the type of teacher your child has. But for me, just kind of opening that dialogue, first of all, in a very gentle, informal way, touching base as you're handing them over in the morning, going, positive morning, all's good, or we've had some wobbles, just keep an eye out. I know some teachers set up almost code words with their kids and the parents, and I love seeing this kind of thing. Some teachers ask parents to just send a message, like handle with care, because some stuff has happened. And those teachers then know to look out for those children. And these are not necessarily children on the spectrum, it's just children that have experienced any form of difficulties, that morning, that weekend. And setting up this little system, whatever that looks like, and it's going to look different depending on, like I say, your school, your teacher, but setting up this little system where you can notify the teacher, look, we've had meltdowns, I need you to keep a closer eye. Or we've had meltdowns, and then maybe they'll keep a closer eye, not just that they need extra care, but maybe they'll keep a closer eye on their behaviour, and maybe they'll start to notice things in a child that's previously been masking. It's like, oh, okay, I am noticing that now you've said they were a bit dysregulated this morning. I am noticing that they are, I don't know, stimming more, or quieter, or louder, or busier, or more withdrawn, or whatever it might be. And it might not only help to, which obviously is the ultimate goal, to help make sure your child is okay and feels regulated and feels happy and calm, but also to help sort of educate your child's teacher about your child and about their potentially very subtly, not very obviously displayed difficulties. And it helps the teachers sometimes to see through the masking a bit more and actually offer the children the support that they need. Now, for us, we have an app with the school, so you can message teachers directly. They don't always see the messages, and sometimes responding is delayed, understandably, because obviously they're busy and they have teaching to do beyond just sort of replying to messages from parents. But whatever that looks like for you and your child's school, if you can set up this system where you check in at certain times, perhaps you request extra meetings, maybe it's once a month, maybe it's once a week, maybe it's just a very kind of a quick, depending on kind of relationship with your child's teacher, a quick, yeah, oh no, we've had issues today, we'll talk later, or, I'll send you a message about it, or a bit dysregulated today, that knowing to handle with care when you get the handover, either way, either directly into school or out from school, can just give everyone involved in caring for your child the right information so they can better care for your child. And this may seem like a really small, insignificant thing, but honestly, it's one of the biggest things that you can do to care for your child and to make sure that your child's needs are noticed and met in school. This is more important than ever if your child is not an obvious child with autism. So I think if I think back to baby number 2, who's now a teenager, Will, who's now 13, back when he was 3, he was the most obvious of the children in that his autism traits were more obvious. He didn't want to join in with the other kids. He didn't want to wear shoes inside. He didn't want to make eye contact. Didn't want to do this, that, and the other. So he wasn't, I wouldn't say he was super disruptive, but he probably had the potential to be quite disruptive. So it was quite natural for the teachers to observe his quirks and traits and to be able to report on them, for assessment purposes or to offer them extra support or whatever. When it comes to my girls who mask and mask and mask and mask, getting the teachers to even notice their traits and their difficulties has been a lot more of a challenge. And the different teachers that we've had in schools have noticed this to a different degree, based largely upon their experience with children on the spectrum, their level of education in neurodiversity, their experience as a teacher, potentially the kids they've had in their class before and what they've taught them. And some teachers have been able to notice from their girls' face just changing, the way they hold their face changing, they've been able to notice that they're struggling. And other teachers have been, said with love, oblivious to when they've been struggling, because masking girls with autism can just come across as very good girls, in inverted commas. They're just very, very compliant, very willing to please, very, keen to get on with their work, and not what you'd call a quote-unquote troublesome child in the class, just a really well-behaved child. But just because a child is quieter and apparently compliant with requests and not climbing the walls in the class doesn't mean that they're not struggling and facing challenges. And often it's those children, as we parents know, they're the children that come home and often have the biggest meltdowns because they've been bottling everything up so much all day. So if we can improve this communication, and this is something I've really noticed has worked so well, If we can improve that communication, especially when you've got a child that masks, and you're unlikely to have the can I have a word because they've been really overtly disruptive in the class. If you can improve that communication, those teachers just start to notice the little changes in your child, the little things that they're struggling with, and are able to support them even when they're not physically screaming for support, but yet they actually need it. Next one is more of a formal request, which is asking for, in England, it is called an EHCP, so that's an educational plan. So it's an education, health and care plan. But in Wales, they are called IDPs, which is the individual development plan. Now, you would initiate these by speaking to your child's school, speaking to the ALENCO, the Additional Learning Needs Coordinator. And this is sort of a formal plan that's put in place by the school to make sure that the child has the support that they need. Now, in Wales, I can't speak to the rest of the country, but in Wales, it used to be a system where children would apply for statements and become a statemented child. And this was a sort of quite a very, very formal process where you had to put together this argument for the statement. It went to panel, and then this statement stayed with the child, I believe, throughout their entire school education. This has kind of been done away with in Wales, and now we've moved on to this IDP system. Now, the statements, from what I can gather, used to come with a budget per child. So a child would be granted a certain amount of hours, and then the child would have that set amount of hours from a TA, a teaching assistant. My understanding of it now from speaking to my child's school is that whereas the statement would come with a budget and additional money for the school to provide those services to that child, now each individual school is given an allocation of funds, and they have to divide that up between the children with additional learning needs within the school. So if they've got the whole pot and they've got one child, and it's very unlikely to just be one, but if there's one child with additional learning needs, that pot gets given to that one child. If they have 100 children with additional learning needs, that same pot gets divided by those between those 100 children. And from what I can understand, the size of this pot is based on the sort of socioeconomic status of the area that the school is in. So schools in more affluent areas would have a smaller budget than schools where the children are coming from homes that are less affluent. So from what I can gather, each school is allocated these funds based on the level of wealth in the surrounding community of the school, as opposed to the number of children with additional learning needs. Now, obviously, the problem that comes with this is that each school will get the children that it gets, and additional learning needs are not necessarily correlating with the financial status of the parents. And however many children go to that school and have additional learning needs is just largely going to depend, not how many children have it, but how many children get flagged as having additional learning needs. It's just largely going to depend on partly the education of the teachers and how many are picked up as needing additional support. So the problem with this system, from what I can see, is that the school doesn't know how many children it's going to get with additional learning needs, and the people allocating the funds aren't going to know how many children with additional learning needs are going to that school. So largely you're going to end up with a lot of schools with a lot more children with additional learning needs than they have got budget to help them, which is the problem. So you can request for an EHCP in England or an IDP in Wales through the school. You could go to your local authority. There's lots of information on the government website. I suggest you read it if this is something that you feel that your child needs. And I'm going to be honest with you, I have not got IDPs officially in place for my girls yet. This is something that is a little bit of an ongoing thing. Our school is overstretched with the number of children that have been identified as having additional learning needs compared to the budget that they've been given. And I understand that this is a position a large amount of schools find themselves in. And it is probably a testament to how good the teachers are in picking this stuff up. I'm going to guess that it is, it's credit to the teachers for noticing that these children have needs, which is great. But then if they haven't got the budget to help them, then that is in itself a challenge. Now, I know lots of schools, ours included, are able to provide support for your children, and I'll go into a lot of what that is in a second, but are able to provide support without this official document. However, I think my concern is that without this official document, when your children move through the school and on to perhaps secondary school, if they don't have these things in place, the worry is that they get a little bit lost in the system. Now, the idea is as your child's needs change, then, they can make changes or put things in place for them. But then I guess my concern is that these things take time. And while I feel that my girls are very well taken care of in primary school at the moment and their needs are largely met, I also know that they're children that mask and that they're not fully showing the level of the difficulties that they truly face in school, and therefore they're perhaps not being assessed or noticed at the level of help they actually need. And as they get older, their needs are going to become more challenging because life becomes more challenging, doesn't it? When you go to secondary school, then you've got lots of different teachers and things. So I think that's my concern, which is why I'm definitely going to be in talks with the school about how to ensure that the transition goes really well, because ultimately Will went to secondary school with a statement because he was on the old system, and I feel that that level of transition has been amazing and the level of support he's received has been amazing. I've been invited in for formal meetings and things, but I have a feeling that's because that statement was in place and they were sort of obliged to do that. And my concern is that if the girls don't have that, they won't have that sort of same level of support. So it is something that's more challenging to get, but it is something that's definitely worth speaking to your child's school about. And if you're not happy with the answers you get from the child's school, to go to the local authority and speak to them and sort of to take it further. Because ultimately, if we don't advocate for our own children, then, who's going to? So other things that you can request, and lots of these are going to vary from school to school, but it's definitely worth discussing them. And if there are any other things I don't mention in this episode that your child's school has offered, or, something you've thought of, I'd love it if you share them in the comments. It's great to have this community of parents that kind of share and support each other. If you are listening on the podcast, by the way, and not watching on YouTube, then I don't think it'll let you comment on the audio version of the podcast, but do head over to the video on YouTube and just join in the conversation in the chat. By the way, while you are watching on YouTube, do please hit the subscribe button. I think it's over 60% of you watching are not subscribed, so I'd love to have you as part of our little gang. So some of the things you can request, something as basic as your child being allowed to wear ear defenders if they need to. This is sounds like something that's just so basic. You can send your own ear defenders in for your children. Most schools will have them that they can wear. My children do like having their own. They just, different brands of them feel different. They like having their own. You can get the in-ear ones, the loops that just literally sit inside your ears, a bit like a headphone, which Bella has. She doesn't use them all the time, but she has them for sort of certain times of the school day or certain events, and they're really quite subtle and they're very pretty actually. And then you've got the overhead ear defenders, which just look like big external headphones, and they're the ones that Zara uses. She does prefer to use her own, like I said, but they do have them in school if necessary. And it's just something that until a need is flagged, your child might not even be offered ear defenders, and something as simple as ear defenders could just make their day feel so much smoother and just less overwhelming. It's you can ask if the children are allowed to actually use fidget toys. Now, I know fidget toys are one of those things that were originally developed for children with autism or ADHD, and then they were they became a bit of a craze, didn't they, for all kids. And understandably, they're fun, they're cool, they're pretty, they're fun to fiddle with. However, I'm sure some teachers must find it distracting to have kids effectively doing what looks like playing with toys. But if your child is identified as having autism, ADHD, and you can point out to your child's teacher that these things will really help them, then it's a case of they'll be allowed to use them. And I know for my girls especially, who are massive rule followers, I guess that's partly an autism thing, but massive rule followers, I'm not allowed to do this, I'm not allowed to do this. Just for your child's teacher to be able to say to your child, no, it's okay, you're allowed to use this. I know that, if you're feeling stressed or overwhelmed, you're allowed to use this. This isn't you being distracted or naughty or playing with toys when you shouldn't be. You're allowed to use this if you feel you need it, if it's a fidget toy or whatever. Then that kind of allowance from the teacher, that talking to the teacher and having that dialogue with the teacher can make such a difference. Honestly, I can sometimes say to my girls until I am blue in the face, you are allowed to do this. As your mother, I give you permission to do whatever it is. And they're like, but the teacher said I'm not allowed. So sometimes I literally have to stand with the teacher and my child and say, can you please tell my child they're allowed to do this thing? And then they're like, okay, teacher said it's okay now. And then they can. So having that relationship with your child's teacher, and then making sure that the child knows that they have the teacher's permission to do the thing, like use the fidget or wear the ear defenders, can make such a difference. And it's really just sounds so simple, but it's made a massive difference to my girls especially. Other sensory things could be uniform allowances. Our children's school is really, really chill with uniform. Maybe your child's school is more strict, but maybe they've got a sensory issue with a certain, blazer or whatever. And by having this relationship with the school, if you know that, or they know rather, that your child has autism or is on the pathway for autism, then they may be able to make certain allowances with what they have to wear uniform wise if that's a struggle. They should be able to offer your child a sort of a way out, a subtle way of removing themselves from situations where they are feeling overwhelmed. Sometimes this could look like a code word between the teacher and the child, and it just means, I'm feeling overwhelmed, I need 5 minutes. Maybe there's a set place in the school where they can go, or a set corner of the classroom they can go and decompress. Maybe it's using things like traffic light system. I know that Zara's teacher uses a traffic light system where they're feeling like, yeah, I'm great, or feeling a bit wobbly, or oh, no, really struggling. And just having that communication, that system, that easy way for the child to be able to say, I'm struggling and I need help in that coded way, whether it's a traffic light system or some classrooms have like different buckets of like, they've got to put their lollipop stick and if they're happy or sad or whatever. And this is great for all kids, let's face it, for the teachers to be able to know what they're dealing with and which children are overwhelmed or which ones are happy. But if your child's got autism, this is especially important because they may struggle to speak up, to advocate for themselves, because ultimately social communication is one of the autism challenges. So having a direct system that you've set up between your child and their teacher for them to be able to say, hey, I'm struggling, and then to know what the system is for them to be able to go to a quiet space or whatever, can just make such a massive difference. There may be some sort of movement breaks that can be introduced by your child's school. Now, I don't know if this is an all school thing or an our school thing, but Zara, our youngest, who I'm pretty sure has ADHD as well as autism, we are discussing that and going down pathways to that as well. But she started doing something called sensory circuits, which from what I can gather, sounds loads of fun, but it's kind of bouncing on things and twirling on things. It's moving and sort of what I call shaking the wiggles out, and they do them at the beginning of the school session, so maybe at the beginning of the morning or the beginning of the afternoon. And it's for children that become overwhelmed. It's children with autism or ADHD. And I guess the children with ADHD, it just helps to tire them out, literally to sort of run them ragged and really help them regulate through movement. So ask if sensory circuits is something that's available in your school, if your child can be involved in it, because Zara's been loving it. I think it's a reasonably new thing, like a last few years thing in our school. I don't know if it's something they do in all schools, but if it's not happening in your school, then maybe ask about whether something like that could be set up, because Zara is just absolutely loving it and really benefiting from it. There are also things that can be used within the classroom setting for children that struggle with the ADHD element. I suppose I'm thinking about the hyperactivity, wobble chairs, as well as sort of like an extension of the fidget toys, but for physical movement. So ask your child's teacher if there's anything like this that would be available for them too. Another big element of support that's been helpful, and it's only at very sort of specific times of the year, but it's preparation for change. And this has been huge. So specifically, I feel like my children need a lot more support when they are, say, moving to a new class. They want to know what the classroom looks like. And this is especially important if they're moving sort of not just like to the classroom next door and they're still using the same toilets, but maybe they're going from the infants to the juniors, and then they're going to be in a different yard and totally different teachers and different toilets, and so much is different. And especially if it's a new teacher, if they have had that handover before the summer holidays, they've done so much better over the summer and they've enjoyed September much, much more. So this can look like extra visits up to the new class. Generally, there'll be like a moving up day anyway, but my children kind of need a little bit more than that initial just a couple of hours. So maybe it would be going to look at the classroom at a quieter time, have a little tour, having to look at the toilets and things. And then if you can ask either your child's teacher to take the pictures, or if you can take pictures, and I'm talking like when there's no children there, just literally of the space, or a video. And if they can look at these pictures and videos before they do that, move up in September, the transition is going to be so much smoother. Same goes for school trips, anything where, there's like some sort of theatre coming into the school, or there's a dressing up day. The more support your child can have with knowing what to expect, the more they're going to enjoy the experience. So maybe there's photos of when they went on the same trip last year, that kind of thing, that your child's teacher will probably already have somewhere in their folders or on their computer that they can show your child, and they can know what to expect. A visual timetable can be massively helpful for children with autism as well, and this is something that your child's teacher might be able to supply them. When they're very little, this literally looks like pictures of what you can do first, then next, and then after that. As the children get older, it can look just like an actual timetable that's just written out with words. And I think naturally the day becomes a lot more structured as the children get older, as they move through the school. And then obviously when they go to secondary school, it's very structured and everyone has the same timetable, each week, or whether they have a week A, week B, but you know what to expect. But if your child's teacher is aware that your child really responds to routine, really responds to the structure, they'll know that when these changes are going to happen, so maybe it's Christmas and the routine goes out the window, or they're going on a trip or whatever, if they know your child's going to need that little bit of extra prep, chances are they've gone into teaching because they love kids and they don't want kids to be upset. They want to support your child. That's why they're doing this job. Teachers go into teaching because they love teaching kids, and they want the kids in their class to be happy. And if they know that your child is going to be happier because they can give them that little bit of extra support and know what to expect, then chances are they're going to do it. And my guess is if your child's teacher realizes this works so well for your child, they'll start doing this thing as larger amounts of the class, because in so many classes there are so many undiagnosed kids, and just kids that would respond well to all of these things like visual timetables, but aren't necessarily diagnosed, so haven't requested the actual support themselves. But largely, anything that's going to be put in place to support your child, like a visual timetable, even if the teacher put it in place for all the kids, there's no child that's not going to benefit from that in some way. So how's the best way to approach the school about all of this? I mean, initially very informally and having a chat. I'd always highly recommend just being as approachable as possible you can to the school, being as helpful as you can to the school, knowing that you're an approachable parent that is not going to lose their stuff when things are brought to you. I think a lot of teachers are very nervous because they've had experiences where they have had to speak to very sort of normal, reasonable, in inverted commas, parents, and said, we've noticed this difficulty with your child, and they've had parents blow up in their faces about it. It's like, not my child. And it's not about how the teacher handled it, and it's not about the teacher or anything of it. It's the fear in the parent, and it's that reaction. It's like the denial, the fear, the anger, all those emotions. But I know so many teachers that have had that directed directly at them. So I know a lot of teachers are quite nervous about having to have these conversations with parents. So if you can just make it known that you are super approachable, that you want these lines of communications to be open, and ultimately everyone's lives are going to be easier because of it, then, please do that. Anything that you can do to help the school, because most schools are underfunded and understaffed. So if there's anything you can do to help, maybe you're really artistic and you could go in and help with some art project or display or something, or maybe you've, I don't know, got a dance background and you want to go and help with the dance club, or I've before now helped with photo and video stuff in the school that they needed help with. And just if you can just offer up your services and be helpful and know that you are that kind of helpful, approachable parent, you'll ultimately get to know the staff in the school a lot better. They'll be more approachable for you to go and talk to them. You'll be more approachable for them to talk to you, and just everything's going to be a lot more friendly. And let's face it, it's putting a lot of good into your child's school in order to do these things. So it's only good things can happen when you are just adding value to your child's school, but also it really does help to build those relationships with the school and with the parents. So when you do need things, you don't feel so bad for asking. When you're like, look, I need your help with filling out these reports and all this kind of stuff. I know you're stretched, but at least you feel like you've contributed a little bit back, and everything you're asking for, is coming from a very reasonable place. Ultimately, then you can make formal requests via email, in writing, to your child's teacher, to the head teacher. And ultimately, if you're not getting anywhere, that's then taken to local authority. If you really feel like you're trying your best to get your child's school to set up a notice that your child has needs and those needs aren't being met. So there is always the option to sort of take it to the next level, but I'd always try the gentle and friendly approach first, because you're going to get a lot further by having an amazing relationship with your child's school rather than a battling relationship with that same school, because ultimately your goal is the same. You want the children to be happy. They want all the children in the school to be happy. You want your child to be happy. You're working with what you're working with, and that you're seeing a lot more at home probably than they're seeing in school. They're working with what they're working with, which is probably a lot of children with additional learning needs and not enough budget. And if you can be as friendly, as amenable as possible, then hopefully you can kind of meet somewhere in the middle and sort of achieve everybody's goals in the most amicable way possible. Now, if you have got a child with autism, or a child recently diagnosed with autism, or maybe on the pathway, you might be wondering how best to discuss autism with your child, to explain to them what it is in an age-appropriate way that feels empowering, and to just make sure that they understand their own minds in a really positive way. Well, you can click on that video on screen now if you're watching on YouTube. If you're listening on the podcast, you can rate, review, subscribe, and head to YouTube to join the conversation. Check out my Patreon for some early release videos, as well as some bonus resources, which will be really helpful for you. And I shall see you guys in the next one. Bye.